Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Bauval was born in Alexandria, Egypt in 1948. He came to Britain in 1967, where he completed his higher education. After graduating in construction engineering in 1973 in London, he worked in various parts of Africa and the Middle East until 1985. In 1986, he began his research into the pyramid texts, the Giza monuments, and their association with astronomy. His thesis on the correlation between Orion and the Giza pyramids was published in the academic journal Discussions in Egyptology in 1989-1990. His first book, The Orion Mystery, was an international bestseller and translated into 12 languages. His latest book, Keeper of Genesis, co-authored with Graham Hancock, of course, has become yet another bestseller. Despite travelling the world in his quest for knowledge, Robert Bauval lives happily with his wife and 2 children in tranquil Buckinghamshire, here in England. A long way from the pyramids and sands of Egypt, perhaps, but they, I'm sure, are never far from his thoughts. At the end of Robert's presentation, he will be joined here by his close friend and colleague, Graham Hancock, and together they will make a brief announcement before showing you a unique short videotape. But it's now time to digest yet further startling revelations and, I might add, marvellous images from a man whose literary talents have made him a household name, quite literally, throughout the world. Ladies and gentlemen, your appreciation, please, as you welcome Mr. Robert Bauval.
Well done, Graham, well done. People ask me, how did Graham and myself get together? It's rather a long story, and I'm told I don't have much time tonight. But the meeting point was through our agents in London, Mr. Bill Hamilton. And I got a phone call from Bill Hamilton one day in early '93, and he said, "Hey, would you like to meet Graham Hancock?" I said, "Great, I'd love to, the man of the sign of the sea." But he said, "You'll enjoy that. He is a bit like you, you're both the same, you've traveled around the world, you're intrigued in all these mysteries, but there is something, I'm sure, Robert, that you'll be keen to know. He can talk as much as you can." I said, "I've got to see that." And indeed, well, I say we're almost at par, and we become very good friends. It's been 3 years we've been working together, and it's through the friendly cooperation and respect, mutual respect that we have for each other, that Keeper of Genesis has come to be. Fingerprints of the gods. Graham has made a most compelling case that in our remote and dark past, a lost civilization left its mark, its fingerprints, all over the world, in the forms of myths, maps, legends, and most impressively in the forms of huge monuments. Most striking, the most awesome of these fingerprints is surely the Giza necropolis in Egypt, where today stand the 3 great pyramids and the Sphinx. Now, there is a curious tradition, curious legends, stories. Indeed, even the ancient Egyptians themselves speak of survivors of the gods that made their way to Egypt long, long before their own civilization matured, and there brought with them a legacy of knowledge, of wisdom. And underneath the Giza necropolis, somewhere below where stand the 3 great pyramids and the Sphinx, was buried or concealed hermetically this body of knowledge in the form of sacred writings, in the form of records, possibly a hall of records from this lost civilization. Now, all Egyptologists, archaeologists, philologists, every single ist on this planet rejects this sort of theories, this sort of stories. To them, this is merely myth, legends, not worthy of any attention. But as you will see, we believe that this particular myth is rooted in reality. And what I will endeavor to do tonight is to take you on a quest. The whole idea is for you to join me, and of course Graham, on this quest for the hidden legacy of mankind. Is there or is there not something there for us to retrieve? And the best way to do it is to ask not the Egyptologists, indeed to ask the very people who might have been involved in this matter of the legacy, the ancient Egyptians themselves. I propose that tonight we shall let them speak. We shall let the pyramid builders speak to us across time, and they shall speak to us, as you will see, using a most extraordinary and precise language, a language that all of us can understand once we can break into the coding system. And it is very simple, provided that we understand the principles upon which this language is based. So, I want you to imagine yourselves going to Egypt and going to the Giza necropolis, and there undertaking the quest, the search, the investigation, and see where it leads, step by step. There, you are in front of the Giza necropolis, and you meet the Great Sphinx of Giza, keeper of the necropolis. Behind him is the so-called second pyramid of, supposedly, as Graham explained, the pharaoh Khafra, who reigned in 2500 BC or so. And you wonder, you look at this and you wonder, because that's what this is about, is to provoke an enormous question in your mind. What is this? Who left this? What for? The same pyramid, illuminated these days by the sound and light show using laser light. This is about sunset. Now, imagine yourselves right at the top of the Great Pyramid. The Great Pyramid nearby, it's about somewhere here. And you'll be standing atop and looking down at this site at dawn, on a very special dawn. Here we go. It's Graham and me perched on top of the Great Pyramid, right at the apex. And we're looking down towards the Sphinx. And here's the pyramid you saw illuminated, the second pyramid, casting shadows with the rising sun, casting the shadow of the rising sun on the spring equinox. This picture was taken by Santa, Graham's wife, on the 22nd of March this year. And we were there for this very specific reason, to look at the rising sun on the spring equinox. Bear this in mind, because it is the rising sun on the spring equinox that holds the ultimate key to the riddle which we hope to unravel tonight. You're looking now from high above to on the site of the Giza necropolis, the three great pyramids all together. Here you have the Great Pyramid, supposedly built by Cheops, the one that you were looking at, the second pyramid. You were standing up there, by the way, looking down this way. And I was pointing somewhere in this direction towards a monument. And here, the so-called third, smaller pyramid. Now, I will dispense with all the measurements and figures concerning these monuments. They're all laid out in detail in my first book, The Orion Mystery, in Fingerprints of the Gods, and indeed also in Keeper of Genesis. So let's dispense with this. But I want you to grasp in your mind the awesome scale of this project, the awesome, gigantic scale that you're looking at here. And to do that, in this picture is the Great Sphinx of Giza. It is as long as a city block, as high as a 10-story building, much higher than this ceiling above me. And it is in this picture. Here it is, like a little dinky toy compared to the three giants in the back. That is what you are looking at here. 15 million tons of material, quarried, hauled, cut into perfect blocks, and raised in perfect geometrical shapes. The Great Pyramid stands 480 feet above ground level. It contains 6.5 million tons of material, set in perfect geometrical shape and set, as you will see soon, in perfect astronomical alignment. And you open your guidebook, you open your Egyptological books that you might have, and the first thing that you're told about these monuments is that they are tombs. They are tombs to house the body of 3 pharaohs. 3 pharaohs who wanted their names, their grandeur, their power to be known forever and forever. That is why they built these monuments, in order that posterity knows how great and powerful they were. That is what you would be told. And here is when you strike the first problem. You're looking inside a graphic representation of the so-called King's Chamber inside the Great Pyramid. This is a graphic representation done by one of the engravers of Napoleon, representing apparently when the Arabs opened the Great Pyramid in the 9th century. In any case, they found no inscriptions either inside or outside the Great Pyramid, or indeed in any of the other pyramids at Giza. And indeed, as Graham pointed out, and I will emphasize later on the Sphinx, these monuments are totally and utterly anonymous. And here comes the question. If we are dealing with powerful, megalomaniac, eccentric kings who wanted everyone to know how powerful they were, where is their names? Why did they not tell us who built those monuments and why? It does not make sense. Now, if there is an Egyptologist in the crowd, I would be told immediately that this is not quite true. Above the ceiling of the King's Chamber, as you will see later on in other slides, there are 5 so-called relief chambers. Egyptologists are not quite sure what these chambers are about. But in any case, in 1837, when these chambers were discovered, the discoverers announced that they had found graffiti written supposedly by some workmen, and on one of these graffitis, the name of Khufu, Cheops, apparently could be read. There is a lot of doubt as to the authenticity of this graffiti. It has even been suggested that the explorers who opened the chambers above may have hoaxed it. And they had plenty of reasons to do so. They had been researching there for months on end without finding anything. And it seems that they might have thought that at least they would have proved who the pyramid belonged to. In any case, fraud or no fraud, basically faint graffiti with the name of Cheops put there by some unknown worker scribbling in some poor red paint, graffiti, and Egyptologists sit on this data. They consider it more than enough to attribute this monument to King Cheops. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you go by these standards, then many buildings around the world, Empire State Building, Canary Wharf, and perhaps the public toilets in Trafalgar Square, belong to somebody called Kilroy. Certainly not enough evidence to allocate 6.5 million tons of archaic high-tech so easily. The next problem you come along to face is this. Well, where is King Cheops? No bodies were ever found either inside or outside the Great Pyramid. To this day, King Cheops is nowhere to be found. Neither his remains, or his treasures, or his tools, or anything at all. Nothing. But Egyptologists, again, are satisfied that they have found King Cheops. And you're looking at him here. It is a statue that was found 600 kilometers, miles, 1,000 kilometers to the south of the Great Pyramid. And on this statue, again, faintly inscribed what looks like the name of this king. You're looking at a rather enlarged photograph of this statue. If you look at my fingers, it is about that big. We're supposed to go home because the mystery is solved. This is it. We have found King Cheops. Here he is. He's in a little glass box in some corner of the Cairo Museum, passed by and ignored by all the tourists because they can hardly see that puny little thing representing the great builder of the Great Pyramid. Again, very flimsy evidence indeed. But is it possible that the pyramid builders and their monuments were not mute, that they did speak eloquently, that they spoke most powerfully, but not in the language that Egyptologists are accustomed to, that they spoke the universal language that we would call today scientific language? And let's examine this possibility. Because one thing that you will also read in Egyptological textbooks is that it is a fact, it is not a question of theory, it is a fact that the Great Pyramid is perfectly constructed in scientific manner. Let me explain what this means. You're looking at an overhead of the Great Pyramid. It is set on a square base, an area of 13 acres, a gigantic area. Apparently you can put 22 tennis courts in that area. It's enormous. The side of that square measures 230 meters, 750 feet. Were you to walk all around the Great Pyramid, you'll be walking almost a kilometer. That is what you're confronted with. But that square is so perfectly square, so perfectly set on the ground. The angles of each corner is as close as, damn it, to 90 degrees. And in order to achieve this then and now, we need to apply very, very careful surveying techniques. I speak, I must say, with a certain amount of experience. I'm a construction engineer and I've set out monuments myself and buildings in very difficult conditions. And I can tell you that you need a very good surveyor with very good instruments to do this. One of the things you need to do, once you've set the rough corners of the square, is to ensure that the square is perfectly locked with the diagonal. And that is how you know that you've got on the ground a perfect square. But here is something odd with this monument. because when they built the monument, they left an outcrop of rock measuring 7 meters high, a bit lower than this ceiling, but certainly high enough for the builders not to be able to see across the diagonals. To cut a long story short, what this means is that we're dealing with very, very good surveyors. Very good surveyors, because they achieved what we today would have difficulty in achieving in those circumstances. We've got to accept this as a matter of fact. What is also a matter of fact, and most incredibly still, is that they set this square such that each face is perfectly directed to a cardinal point, a cardinal direction. This means that this face, this is the eastern face, is directed perfectly due east, due south, due west, and due north. Here is this dark blob that you see here is the entrance of the Great Pyramid. And you will see that all the corridors, galleries, chambers, and shafts, as you will see, are directed along the north-south axis, what we call the meridian axis in astronomy. To such a precision that, again, we are astounded today. 5% of a single degree. That is Swiss watch precision. Take it from me. And therefore we must contend with something else, because you cannot achieve this precision. Not then, not now. Unless you aim at the passage of a star along what we call the meridian axis of the sky. You need a pinpoint of light to aim at to get that kind of precision. Not the sun, not the moon, not a piece of stick. It can only be done with the passage of a star. It is, again, a fact. Let me explain what this means. You know that the... Am I blocking the view there, by the way, because I keep walking around? The stars, the sun, the moon, the planets, all rise in the east. And they rise and culminate at the meridian. They reach their highest point in their transition at the meridian every day. And then they slowly descend and set in the west. This monument, there is no doubt, is locked to the passage of a star at the meridian. The question is, which star and when? And why? Now, having driven the point that the pyramids of Giza do not have... Actually, I'm being interrupted by a wonderful show here of some lady taking her clothes off. It's quite incredible. I'll have to move here. I'm serious. Having driven the point that the pyramid builders of Giza did not use hieroglyphic texts, but seemed to be using astronomy somehow to express themselves. Not one single word. Here you come to another anomaly, another problem. You're looking at pyramids of the 5th and 6th dynasty, the kings who followed immediately the Giza builders. And clearly, you're looking at shabbier, poorer, much less well-constructed pyramids. Here is one, for example, that has totally collapsed, hardly looking like a pyramid at all. Nowhere near the quality and size and precision of their predecessors. But unlike their predecessors, these pyramids are loaded with hieroglyphic texts, from floor to ceilings, hundreds and hundreds of hieroglyphic texts. Now, the question is, what do they say? This is the logic of investigation. And not surprisingly, as you look into those texts, you will find that they speak of the sky, of the stars, and particularly of a constellation, the constellation of Orion. And they identify the constellation of Orion with a deity called Osiris. And that this region of the sky where Orion is, and you will see other constellations as well, they call, or at least it's translated here by the Egyptologist who translated this, the netherworld. It's the wrong term, really. It's too hazy for me. They actually have a word for this, the ancient Egyptians. They call it the duat. And when they mention the duat, they mention a specific area of the sky. And at this stage, we know that it contained Orion. And therefore, now we have a cue. We have something to carry on with our investigation and see if these stars have anything to do with the star that we're trying to find linked to the Great Pyramid. Now, here is a curious passage in those pyramid texts. We have the king, identified to the deity Osiris. I will explain why in a moment. But here is the interesting thing. We have the pyramid identified to Osiris. The construction of the pyramid identified to Osiris. Now this is very interesting, because if you make the transposition between Osiris and his stellar counterpart, Orion, then what we're being told here is to look into a connection between the pyramids and the constellation of Orion. That, again, is the process of investigational logic. Now, what we seem to have here, unavoidably, is a hieroglyphic language veiling a more powerful, a more scientific language. I will coin the word astroglyphics. We have hieroglyphics veiling astroglyphics. That's what we've got. Now, let's see what this means. Let me explain what you see, because those pictures are rather small. Here is the Giza necropolis with the Sphinx and those pyramids, anonymous but containing powerful astronomical alignments to the stars, and seemingly related, or inviting us to relate them to something to do with the constellation of Orion at this stage. Whereas here we have the immediate later pyramids with chambers loaded with hieroglyphic texts. And what we should normally do, according to my logic, is that we should take this allegorical language of astronomy and put it back in its original images, in its original glyphs, if you like. They're astroglyphs, to look at the parts of the sky which they invite us to consider and try and make sense as to what they're trying to tell us, and particularly what these people were trying to do. This is the right approach. I will give you a similarity between the kind of work we do in construction and this approach, the scientific approach. I'm a construction engineer, as I've said, and I've built many projects around the world. And the way we do it is this. We get drawings given to us by an architect. And these drawings bear signs and symbols and mathematical symbols. And our job is to convert these back into the original idea, to actually build what the architect had in mind. What he doesn't want us to do is to look at these drawings and write a story about them, write a book about them. We are simply taking them in the wrong direction. And I give a little analogy as to how this kind of problems work. As children, we all played a little game, we used to call it in France the broken telephone. If I whisper a distorted message, or very faintly in the ear of this gentleman, are you awake, sir? Yeah. Sitting there, and he would pass on the message by whispering down the line and so forth and so forth. By the time he gets to the last person on the row, it is all distorted. We know how this works. We used to play this at school. That's the trouble, is if you take it in the wrong direction, what he should have done, if he didn't quite understand it, is to make me repeat what I said. And this is basically what we're asking, or they're asking us. We have to get back in the right direction. Well, the problem is that this isn't at all what classical Egyptologists have done. When the coding of the hieroglyphic texts was broken in 1822, it fell into the hands of classical scholars, classical academics, most of them at the time studying cultures like ancient Greece and so forth. There was no science of Egyptology, as a matter of fact. And overnight, the science of Egyptology, we are told, was born. Being classical academics, what they did was to take these texts and translate them in classical languages and in our own modern languages, in English, in French, in Italian, in German, and that is what they did. And what they've done, really, is they've taken it in the wrong direction, because it suddenly began to appear to them as some sort of bizarre mumbo-jumbo of superstitious priests writing about the skies and their pharaohs in what appeared to them totally incomprehensible means. So there are passages there. I'll go very briefly, because this is a typical example of the sort of thing that happened and is still happening. There's a passage that reads, the Duat, this region that we have identified to the region of Orion and to Osiris. The Duat beats your feet to the dwelling place of Orion. And another one has been translated as the Duat beats your hands to the dwelling place of Orion. Although we can still discern the astronomical lingo through those translations, they begin to get distorted. They appear, indeed, to be some mumbo-jumbo. That is what you get. And really, what we've done is, for the last 15 years, we've been arguing that the direction is this way. But the classical Egyptologists refuse to consider this direction, for the simple reason that they don't believe that the ancient builders were any good astronomers. Indeed, that they knew very little about astronomy, or any science as we understand science today. That is the problem. But it stands out like a sore thumb that the people we're dealing with here not only knew about astronomy, as you will see, but could understand the way astronomy, the skies, could be used to convey information and messages through the ages. So let's examine that possibility. Let's see what the ancient Egyptians themselves had to say. And what they tell us with force, one thing they insist upon over and over again in their texts, is that their civilization was a legacy from the gods. That they got their civilization handed down, brought down by the gods. And this is how they tell us the story. They tell us that the universal deity, Atum, who manifested himself in the sun as Atum-Ra, self-created a couple. In turn, this couple created the earth goddess, sorry, the sky goddess and the earth god. And from the womb of the sky goddess emerged 4 anthropomorphic, human-formed, stellar deities who were sent down to earth, and 2 of them, Osiris and his sister wife Isis, became the first rulers, the first divine couple to rule the land of Egypt. A land and a kingdom established in a period they call Tep-Zepi, literally translating as the first time. They established a kingdom of the first time in Egypt. Tep-Zepi, what we would call today Genesis, the kingdom of Genesis. Now, We are told, too, that this kingdom, this divine kingdom of the first time, was established in the region that today we call the Memphite necropolis, the Memphis region, where today stands the Great Pyramids and the Sphinx. So this is what they tell us. We have to read their text, and this is what they tell us. Now, we are faced with a sort of Hamlet story. Osiris was killed by his brother, his jealous brother, and his body was cut into 14 pieces, scattered all over the land of Egypt. And his wife, Isis, was left without a child, without a successor to take over this kingdom of the first time. She gathers back all the pieces of the body of Osiris, brings him back to life using her magical powers, and becomes pregnant. And eventually she bears a son called Horus. Horus is the first god king of Egypt. And it is from Horus that emerges the divine line of kings, of pharaohs of Egypt, the Horus kings. They believe themselves to be the reincarnation, the bodily reincarnation of Horus, the sons of Osiris. That is the myth. This is what they tell us. Meanwhile, they tell us what happened to Osiris. They tell us in no uncertain terms that he departed back to the gods, back to the sky, and established another kingdom in the sky, another kingdom of the first time. And this kingdom they called, as I've said, the Duat. The Duat. So let's have a good look at this Duat. They are attracting our attention to a part of the sky with great significance to their myth, their genesis. Here is that part of the sky, or part of that part of the sky, and you can see the constellation of Orion. I'm having problems with my pointer. I wonder if somebody can get me another one. I'll use this one meanwhile. The constellation of Orion, with the characteristic 3 stars, the belt stars of Orion's belt. And you can see the constellation of Orion. The 3 stars of Orion's belt. And here you see the star Sirius. It was identified to Isis, Isis, the consort of Orion Osiris. When she died, she too became a stellar deity and joined Osiris in the Duat. Along the banks of what they call the winding waterway, which they identified to the terrestrial Nile, the Milky Way. And this is the setup. The Duat encircles, as you will see, another constellation on the other side of the Milky Way. And this is the constellation of Leo. So this is the region of the sky that we are asked to know, to understand, and to see what it has to do with the pyramid builders. And this has nothing to do with the pyramid builders. And I'm inclined to crack the standard joke I have. I will do that because it always works. I hope I get a giggle from you. I keep saying that Graham Hancock puts this slide to put me off in my talk. It's a kind of little standard joke we have, you know. And I'm kind of confused, and I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to do now, to stop the talk or what. It is something that I'm sure a lot of you may know what it is. It is not a cheap Mexican postcard or one of those praying rugs. It is known as the Arecibo interstellar message. It is the first message sent by us, mankind, to the stars in an attempt to communicate with a possible civilization outside our galactic system. It was transmitted to M13, a galaxy 25,000 light years away from us. Now, I don't know why they didn't choose something nearer. Maybe they don't want an answer, but nonetheless, that's what they did in 1974. And this is how it works. It is composed of 1,679 bits of information. Now, we get radio messages constantly coming from the stars, and vice versa. And the reason is that there is background noises that the stars make, and they're not necessarily at all intelligent messages. They're just noise. But if you get 1,679 bits of information transmitted by radio message, you listen, because it is a prime number. If you get a prime number coming across, you listen, because it means this is intelligent. And more so, because this particular prime number is the product of two other prime numbers, 23 and 73. And the suggestion is to split the bits of information in rows of 23 by 73, and you get this peculiar image. And what it is at the top you have a counting convention. Here you have information about the genes and DNA of the creature, the human creature, us, that is here. We're given data concerning the population on this planet and the position of our planet in a solar system. This represents the sun, and the third planet, our planet, is offset near the creature to show that we are from the third planet, planet Earth. Information about the telescope, the radio telescope, its size, and so forth. In short, what you're looking at here is the way that we're trying to communicate with an unknown civilization across time and space. And the reason we use this language, this astroglyphic language, this scientific language, is because there's no need sending a message in English or in Turkish or in French, simply because it doesn't work that way. They will not understand it. They will understand this nowhere, no matter where they are. They will understand this everywhere, in M13 or whatever galaxy we choose to send it to, if there are intelligent people there. So that's the idea. There is another one here, known as the Voyager message. It is stuck or inside a probe called Voyager 1 that was sent outside our solar system in 1976. It's just got out our solar system in the last few years. And it's heading towards the stars. Again, information about coordinates of where we are, the Earth, information on how to play a record, apparently. There's a record inside that sleeve that is entitled The Sounds of the Earth. Whatever sounds they have, maybe Madonna singing or things like that, I don't know. Now, I'm going to be asking this question with all seriousness. Are we getting a message? Are we getting a message from whoever built that site? I am not suggesting that we are getting an extraterrestrial message, although some have. I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm suggesting with all seriousness, we are suggesting, Graham Hancock and myself, that we have all the ingredients of a clever, scientific, astroglyphic message. The way that we today are attempting to communicate with some distant civilization existing somewhere else. Are we getting a message across time from a lost source deep into our past? Somebody who's desperately trying to pass on a message. The ingredients are there. The question is it a message or not? Let's look at this more closely. You will recall that the emphasis of the pyramid builders was to ensure that the monuments were perfectly set along the north-south axis, the meridian axis. You're looking at a cross-section of the Great Pyramid along the north-south axis. And you would enter the monument on the north face, down a descending passageway. Here's the so-called subterranean chamber, up an ascending corridor, the so-called Queen's Chamber, into a grand gallery, into the so-called King's Chamber. Here, by the way, are the so-called relief chambers where these graffitis were found. And here are what Egyptologists still call today the air shafts. They haven't, whoever did this diagram hasn't even bothered to show shafts, although we know they exist. Indeed, one of them is the most mysterious shaft indeed. It has a little door at the end of it, and we'll be talking about this door and also the possible chamber under the Sphinx when I conclude my talk. The reason these shafts are not shown on this diagram is because the Egyptologists who did this diagram adhered to the so-called abandonment theory. They believed, they still believe, that the builder of the Great Pyramid abandoned the lower chamber, then moved into a higher chamber here, and then abandoned the second chamber to finally settle for the King's Chamber, or what they call the King's Chamber. You need this abandonment theory to make the tomb theory work, because you cannot have a tomb with 3 chambers because they wouldn't have cut the body of the pharaoh in 3 parts, and therefore Egyptologists have convinced themselves that this is what they're looking at. Builders who changed their mind in a monument of that size and scale and finally ended up with a chamber above. Well, let me tell you this. You do not abandon such work. Indeed, you do not fool around with a monument like this when you are building a monument of 6.5 million tons of material. The architect does not fool around with it. I can tell you that. These are not abandoned chambers, as you will see. Indeed, certainly, they hold the key, this chamber in particular, to one of the major riddles of this monument. So, the meridian is the emphasis of the builders. But, having obsessively set the Great Pyramid on the ground, along the north-south axis, along this meridian axis, you come to another problem. They set the other 2 pyramids along an angle of 45 degrees to the meridian. And they've set a third, smaller pyramid, offset from that diagonal angle. And you have to ask the question, the next point in the investigation is, why? What are they trying to do? What message is there? What glyph are we looking on the ground here? And that is what we have to answer. Well, people who attempted to break into the understanding of these stellar connections began in 1964. A major breakthrough came when 2 researchers, Virginia Trimble, an astronomer, and Alexander Badawi, an Egyptologist, who happily, for us, was also an architect. And they investigated the meaning of these so-called air shafts in the Great Pyramid. There are 2 of them heading south, you can see A and B, heading towards the south meridian, that particular area of the sky that the monument is locked to, and 2 others directed to the north meridian of the sky. And they had a hunch that these were not air shafts at all. Now, Badawi, being an architect who had studied every single tomb in Egypt and who had never seen any tomb ever ventilated, any monument that was supposed to be a tomb ventilated, for the very simple reason that it doesn't make sense to ventilate a dead body. There's no need to ventilate a dead body. It's as if you would take what's in your fridge and put it in the garden. That's the same analogy here. There is no need to ventilate a dead body. But even if they wanted to ventilate a dead body for reasons that they had, they would not build shafts on the incline, because it's a very difficult thing to do if you simply want ventilation. It's the same thing as building a chimney on the incline across this structure. It is a nightmare. It involves all sorts of problems, and it is unnecessary, because what you can do if you really want to ventilate this chamber is to leave a course of the masonry, a horizontal course, with a gap. That's all you need to do, all the way to the outside, and you would achieve ventilation. So obviously, these had a much more important and mysterious significance. And their hunch proved to be correct. They thought that these shafts were linked to the stars in the same way that the monument was. And what they found out is this. And in order to work out which stars and when, they had a hunch, of course, that it had something to do with the constellation of Orion, this constellation in the Duat of Osiris. And they had to use what Graham explained briefly, the precession phenomena, the precession of the equinoxes. And I will explain this extremely quickly because I want to dispense with all the jargon. Precession is one of those things that for some incredible reason we are not very familiar with it in the general daily knowledge that we have. We all know, we've known since we're children, we're taught this at school, that the Earth is a globe, that it rotates on its axis in 24 hours. We know that. We get the effect of night and day. Every schoolboy knows this. We know that the Earth revolves around the Sun in 365 days and a quarter, and we get the effects of the season. But this planet has a third motion. It wobbles, and it wobbles very slowly indeed, in cycles of 26,000 years. We do not feel this wobble. What appears to happen is that if you were to observe the precessional cycle, now we can do that by using computers today. You can have the sky on your monitor screen, use a precessional program and press the button and say precess the sky, and the sky would appear to move in cycles of 26,000 years. And the effect you have is this. The sky, the star field, appears to seesaw backwards and forwards in 26,000 years. That is it. That is precession. That's all you need to know, and indeed, it's as simple as that. So, having established that the sky seesaws backwards and forwards, or appears to seesaw backwards and forwards in 26,000 years, if you were to freeze the constellation of Orion at its passage at the meridian, at the specific direction that the monument is locked at, and you were to observe this precession cycle, this is what you would see. The constellation of Orion would begin its present cycle in about 10,500 BC. At the time of the Pyramid Age, 2,450 BC or so, it would be at 45 degrees altitude as seen from the Great Pyramid. And today, roughly today, it would have reached its maximum position in that cycle. And then it will begin to go down in a couple of centuries and start another cycle. In short, up and down in cycles of 26,000 years. In this current cycle, 10,500 BC is the beginning. And what they discovered is this, that the southern shaft in the King's Chamber pointed to Orion's belt, the center of the constellation of Orion, the center of this Duat region, this Osirian land of the first time in the sky. In case you are wondering how this works physically, this is a diagram that shows it very well. Imagine yourself standing in front of the Great Pyramid, looking at the meridian, looking due south, and speeding up the precession cycle. The constellation of Orion would be here at the beginning of its current cycle in 10,500 BC, at this altitude at the Pyramid Age, and today this is where you would see it. This is what happened. And this is what they seem to have had in mind, to create a link between the Great Pyramid and that area on the ground to the heartland, the very center of this Duat Osirian region in the sky. And here we come to some interesting terminology, because they had a name for this region in the sky, this central region. They called it Ros Tau. It literally means the entrance to the afterworld. And because we're dealing with a stellar world, I will use the terminology that the BBC used when they did a documentary on the Orion mystery. They used the terminology, the gateway to the stars. Or if you prefer the Hollywood version, the Stargate. The Stargate. You will see that this Stargate is also a time gate. But let's carry on with the sequence of our logic. Now here is another odd thing. They had a name for the area where stands the 3 pyramids and the Sphinx, the Giza necropolis. We call this the Giza necropolis. They called it Rostau. They also called it the Stargate. And therefore what you have here is 2 stargates, one on the ground, one in the sky, linked by a shaft. That is what we have. Now, 20 years after Badawi and Virginia Trimble, in 1983, I came along and I worked out the alignment of the southern shaft in the Queen's Chamber, the so-called abandoned chamber with its abandoned shafts. And I worked out the alignment, and not surprisingly, I found out that it pointed to the star Sirius, the star of Isis, the companion of Osiris Orion. And therefore, it was obvious that the pyramids were not mute at all. They were expressing themselves in very powerful stellar language, in these astroglyphic means. And they were directing our attention to these specific stars in the sky. And that is what they want us to do. They went to a lot of trouble to do that. And we should follow the cues. They tell me that the human mind works like a hologram, that you have a left brain and a right brain, and somewhere in the middle is an interface, and you get those bright ideas in the morning, like who's supposed to do the dishes tonight, and things like that. I'm not sure how it works. I don't sense a left brain and a right brain, but I know that something of the sort happened in my mind in 1983, because I began to look at that Duat region, that sky region, with the Milky Way, the Celestial Nile, and so forth, and I was thinking pyramids. I began to think in a sort of dualistic form, like those people who wrote the texts. As above, so below type of thinking. And when I isolated all the pyramids of the 4th dynasty, here are those Rostau pyramids, those Giza pyramids, those gateway pyramids, I began to see that there was quite a striking similarity with the Milky Way and the Nile and the layout of the pyramids. And the next thing that was obvious to do was to have a damn good look at this Rostau in the sky, those 3 stars on the belt of Orion. And here is a picture taken by the Lowell Observatory. And as I drew a line across the 2 stars of equal magnitude, or equal size, apparently, I noticed that the 3rd, smaller star was offset to the left or to the east. And I quickly realized that what you had was a correlation. That the monuments on the ground, the Rostau on the ground, was in correlation with its counterpart in the sky. Now, there was a problem, and this is it. This is what they must have had in mind, to correlate those 3 holographic stars, architectural stars, call them what you like, with these 3 stars in the sky. The land, the heartland, the Rostau of the Duats, with those 3 pyramids representing the Rostau, the gateway on the ground. Now, this is what they must have had in mind. But there is a problem. And here it is. If you were to observe the passage of the 3 stars of Orion's belt, the Rostau stars, at the meridian in 2500 BC, although the images are the same, the picture of the stars appears to be tilted far too much at an angle of 75 degrees to the meridian, not matching what you have on the ground. This is a bit dark because of the light. Here is the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd pyramid, with its characteristic direction of 45 degrees to the meridian. The stars appear to be in the wrong place at that date. The wrong place. Well, perhaps the question should be formulated in a different way. Maybe the stars are not in the wrong place, but at the wrong time. And the word time, like these holographic thoughts, began to float in my mind. Time, 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 time. And when I met Graham Hancock, we tossed these ideas backwards and forwards, and suddenly we said, wait a minute. This is a glyph on the ground representing the deity Osiris, who is told by the text to be the god of the first time. The stars have a first time, and that in our current precessional cycle, they begin their cycle. They have their first time in 10,500 BC. Are they trying to tell us something? Are they trying to tell us, consider these stars, you know now what to look at. But remember, they have to do with the first time of this deity. And we tried it. And when we did that, when we brought the stars down on our computer to 10,500 BC at the beginning, at the first time of their cycle, we got a lock. The stars conveniently moved and settled at 45 degrees. Let me explain how this works, how you can do it on your computers. This is not speculation. This is not theory. This is astronomical fact. The question is not whether this is a fact or not, it's whether this is a coincidence. And I hope to convince you as I go along that it is nothing of the sort. You're looking at a computer reconstruction of the sky in 2500 BC. And here is the three stars of Orion's belt crossing the meridian in 2500 BC. And you can see that they are slanted sharply at about 75 degrees to the meridian. And the Milky Way, too, is kind of skew with. But if we go to the beginning of the current precession cycle, to the first time of the stars, this is what we have. In 10,500 BC, the stars conveniently lock at the angle required to match them on the ground, and so does the Milky Way align itself with its counterpart in the sky. If it is a coincidence, it is 1,000,000 to 1 coincidence. But let me drive this point strongly. And it's important, because if we are right, and I believe we are, then the implications are tremendous. And this information will lead us precisely to where the legacy is, as you will see. Here is a computer reconstruction of the belt stars in 2500 BC. I've superimposed a protractor on the screen. Here is the meridian, and here are the three stars crossing the meridian at their angle of 75 degrees in 2500 BC. What we would like them to be is to match the 45-degree angle that is achieved by the three pyramids. And when you go down to their first time in 10,500 BC, this is what happens. They lock. Facts. Verifiable facts. What they're telling us is that the land where these pyramids stand, this glyph of Osiris, the glyph of Osiris, the god of the first time, is done on the ground in a manner that represents the stars as they were seen in the first time. That is the message. This is the land of the first time, or if you prefer, the land of Genesis. Let's check this out. The first indication that we weren't looking at a coincidence was this. Although they called the necropolis Rostau, they had another name for it. They called it the horizon. It's as if they imagined the three pyramids with the Sphinx, as you shall see, also within that area, encompassed by an artificial horizon on the ground. And it's divided into two parts. We've said that the eastern horizon is where the stars rise, and curiously here on the western side of this artificial horizon, at 27 degrees from the center of the horizon, at a bearing of 27 degrees, are three little pyramids on the edge of the artificial horizon. It's inviting us to consider the setting of certain stars. These three pyramids look like a reduced scale model of the other three, but not at an angle of 45 degrees to the meridian, but at a right angle, east-west. The stars set in the west. If we look at the three stars of Orion's belt setting in the west in 10,500 BC, we again get a lock. Here they are at a bearing of 27 degrees from the center of the artificial horizon. In fact, what we've got is a reproduction of the artificial horizon mimicking what is on the real horizon. Again, a lock. But there is something else that is extremely important about those stars and that date. And this is it. When the stars of Orion's belt, when this gateway, this star gates, strikes the meridian in 10,500 BC, when they strike to match the pattern on the ground of their counterparts, they do so at a very specific time, and that it only occurs, and only occurs, I emphasize, in 10,500 BC. They strike the meridian when the sun is rising due east on the day of the spring equinox. Remember Graham and me standing atop of the pyramid, looking down and pointing somewhere on the day of the spring equinox. Because what we're pointing at is this. And let me explain before what has happened, before you see this thing that we're trying to see in the sky. We have, in a sense, traveled through a stargate. Our mind now has gone through a time gate. We have gone down to the skies of 10,500 BC. We are now in the skies of 10,500 BC, and we have followed the clues. Consider this constellation. Think of it in terms of its first time. We go and we get a lock. Now consider that this happens and only happens in 10,500 BC when the sun is rising on the spring equinox. They're drawing our attention to the rising sun on the spring equinox. There's something important there in the sky that they desperately want us to know about. If we are intelligent, if we can get the prime number transmitted, that's what they're doing. And what is there? What we're pointing at is the Sphinx. The Sphinx is looking due east on the day of the rising sun at the spring equinox. Now, as all of us know, the sun does not rise at the same place throughout the year. On the day of the summer solstice, it rises here, and if you were at Giza, it will be 28 degrees to the left of due east. It will be rising here. Go 6 months later to the winter solstice, and it would be rising here 28 degrees to the right of due east. And on the equinox, it rises due east. The Sphinx is gazing due east on the day of the spring equinox. In fact, this picture was taken on the day of the spring equinox this year. So the Sphinx is without question an equinoctial marker. And in this case, the clue is an equinoctial marker of the spring. We are asked to consider and to see in the sky what the Sphinx is looking at on that spring equinox in 10,500 BC. What can there be for us to be so interested and for them to have gone to all this trouble to convey the message? I will dispense with the identification of the Sphinx. Graham has so eloquently described the argument. there is no question about the Sphinx being an image of Khafra. It is not Khafra, it is a fact. This is established. We have gone through the textual argument, the inventory stela, as Graham Hancock has described, which Egyptologists dispense as some sort of fiction. Whereas, as you were told, they much rely on the famous syllable, khaf. I hope you've covered this, Graham. I was away. Have you?
Yes.
Thank you. We've done that. Now, let's look at this stela carefully. Graham has shown you this. The famous syllable with the re enclosed. And what it tells us, that's what this stela is telling us, is that the statue was not built for Khafra or anybody else. It was built for Atum Har-Makis. Now, we have encountered Atum as the creator god, the god of Genesis, the god of the first time. Who is Har-Makis? Well, we have to contend here with a Grecian rendition of an Egyptian, ancient Egyptian term. It actually means Horem Achet, translating as Horus in the horizon. You will remember that they called the necropolis the horizon, and they see the Sphinx as Horus of the horizon. That's what they're telling us. They're telling us something else. They're telling us that this Horus of the horizon, in the horizon of Giza, is marking the splendid place of the beginning of time. Here is a typical confusion, this broken telephone, this message being transmitted through translation, a little bit distorted, because you will see that what the translator should have done is actually, luckily, put a little annotation to tell us what is the real translation. Is that the beginning of time, the splendid place of the beginning of time, is literally the first time. Tep Zepi, which we have dated in 10,500 BC with our own calendrical system, using the stars of Orion's belt. Tep Zepi. The ancient Egyptians themselves, a Horus king, a high initiate, is saying the Sphinx is marking the splendid place of Tep Zepi. Of course, ignored and dispensed by the Egyptologists. Let's see who is the Sphinx if we use this kind of logic. They tell us Horem Achet, Horus in the horizon. Well, we can understand this. Horus is a deity, the son of Osiris, at the first time, and they speak of the Sphinx being a marker of the first time. Well, we have a date now. Horus in the horizon. But they also nominate the Sphinx Hor Acti, with a subtle difference. Horus of the horizon. Remember this dual way of playing around with their thoughts. Clearly, they're inviting us to consider a celestial Horus of the horizon. One they call Hor Acti, Horus of the real horizon. Let's examine this. But first, let's deal with another anomalistic situation with Egyptologists. They say that the pyramid builders and those who composed the pyramid texts did not mention the Sphinx. Indeed, the ancient Egyptians do not talk about the Sphinx, Egyptologists tell us, until the New Kingdom, until Thutmose and other pharaohs put these stelas at Giza and nominate the Sphinx Hor-Em Achet and Hor-Acti. They are right. There are no references to Hor-Em Achet in the horizon, Horus in the horizon, in the pyramid text. But remember the astroglyphic language. Now, this is like saying that if you were to examine the four Gospels, there wouldn't be a reference of Jesus. This was the greatest monument they built then, and surely they would have referred to it. Well, they did. They did so, because the pyramid text contained hundreds and hundreds of references to Horakti, Horus of the horizon, the astronomical, the stellar twin of whoever Horus in the horizon is supposed to represent. Now, let's look at this very carefully. The Horus king undergoes a journey, we are told in the pyramid text. The Horus king is the living son of Osiris, and before he will depart and join Osiris in the sky, he represents the life force on the ground. He represents the sun. There is no question about this. And in his journey, he is asked to identify himself to the sun and undertake a journey on the land and in the sky simultaneously, intellectually projecting himself as the sun disk in the sky. And the final moment, the culmination moment, the apotheosis of his journey is this. They tell him to position himself 70 days before the sunrise on the day of the summer solstice. 70 days before, and they tell him that he is to position himself on the banks of the winding waterway near the celestial bull. All this information is in the pyramid text. You will find it in Keeper of Genesis. Well, we can reconstruct that. The pyramid texts were compiled in 2500 BC. We set our computer to 2500 BC, and we go to the summer solstice. This is what you would see in the east. In the summer solstice, 70 days before the event. 70 days before the summer solstice. And sure enough, when you do that, again, verifiable facts, you'll find that the sun is indeed positioned next to the bull of the sky, Taurus, on the banks of the Milky Way. They tell us this, and when we check it, it is so. And they tell us now that the Horus king, the solar disk, must cross the celestial river and reach the eastern horizon 70 days later. And when he does so, he will coalesce, he will merge, he will become one with Horakti, with Horus of the horizon. So let's see what happens. We simply follow instructions. And when we do that, this is what happens 70 days later. The sun is in the pose of the constellation of Leo. He is merged, he is entering Horakti, Horus of the horizon. And if Horakti is Leo, and if Horakti is Horem Achet, and if Horem Achet is the Sphinx, then Leo is the counterpart of the Sphinx. He is his celestial twin. It is a fact. Now, there is a problem with this situation. We're looking at the summer solstice of 2500 BC, and it occurs, as we have said, 28 degrees to the right of due east. Remember, the Sphinx looks due east. Now, we know for sure that the ancient Egyptians were extremely clever astronomers. We have shown this. We know for sure that they were capable of aligning monuments to incredible precision, 5% of a single degree on a monument that's 6.5 million tons in weight. They have proved their ability to align monuments to the solstices. One example is this. You're looking at the rising of the sun, this picture taken by Santa Hancock, on the day of the winter solstice at the temple of Karnak. You're looking at the axis of the temple along those marvelous columns, and the sun rising bang on, precisely in the alignment of the axis on the winter solstice. You go on the other side of the Nile, at Luxor, and you're looking at the so-called colossi of Memnon, monuments, statues that weigh 1,000 tons. Very, very difficult to move. And they were aligned perfectly, again, to the rising sun. They gaze at the rising sun at the winter solstice. They knew how to do it, and they knew how to do it with precision, and with big monuments. There's no question about it. So, Why did they make that radical faux pas, this error? Why does Horus in the horizon, the Sphinx, is he gazing due east and not at his celestial counterpart, Horus of the horizon? Could it be possible that these people who aligned monuments to 5% of a single degree make a mistake of 28 degrees? Why is Horus of the horizon in the wrong place? Again, are we asking the question in the wrong way? Is it possible that Horus of the horizon, that Leo is not in the wrong place, but at the wrong time? Is there a time when he would align perfectly with his counterpart on the ground? In this way? Well, there is. And for that, we must consider another mechanistic event happening in the sky with the precession of the equinox. We've seen how the precession of the equinox causes Orion's belt to seesaw up and down. Well, what we have also is an effect influencing the position of the sun at the spring equinox, the station of the sun at the spring equinox along what we call the zodiacal belt or the ecliptic belt. You're only seeing half of it here. There is 12 constellations across which the sun appears to travel in its annual course. But because of the precession of the equinoxes, the position where the sun is during the spring equinox. Now, for example, in the Pyramid Age, it would be about here, near the constellation of Taurus. But because of precession, the constellation appear to move like a carousel, so that the point of the spring equinox changes with the background constellation. Let me explain this in visual terms. If you were to stand in front of the Sphinx today, in his pose, looking due east at the spring equinox today, this is what you would see. The sun rising due east on the spring equinox, and the background stars are Pisces and Aquarius. This is the position, the point of the spring equinox. Soon, the constellation of Aquarius will appear to shift so that it occupies the background behind the sun. This is why we say that the age of Aquarius is soon to come. At the time of Jesus, it was the constellation of Pisces. It would have been behind here. This is why the Christians use the iconography of the fish. It was the beginning of the astrological age of Pisces. With the Egyptians, they knew this very well, because here you see the sunrise at the spring equinox in 1400 BC, the time of Tutankhamun, in the constellation of Aries, the ram. And we know that the iconography of the ancient Egyptians at that time was intensely to do with rams. The alleyways at Karnak and at Luxor are ram monuments. And here is the constellation of Taurus. In 2500 BC, that constellation would have been behind the sun. In 2500 BC, the age that the Sphinx is supposed to have been built according to Egyptologists. And at that age, the age of the bull, the Egyptians knew that this was the age of the bull, because they started the so-called Apis cult of the bull, the cult of the Apis bull. We know that the ancient Greeks also did that in the time of the Chronos civilization. They knew that this was the age of the bull. They would have built an equinoctial marker to match the age. They did not. They did not build a gigantic bull. They built a gigantic lion as an equinoctial marker. This is what they had in mind. A marker to mark a certain age. What is that age? Well, it is precisely at the time when the constellation of Orion marks its first time, 10,500 BC. You will remember that as the constellation of Orion strikes the meridian in 10,500 BC, in this configuration, the sun is rising due east at the spring equinox. This is what you would see at precisely that age, marking the age of Leo. Now, what makes this an unlikely coincidence is this. When the sun strikes the horizon, due east, were you to turn 90 degrees and look at this meridian direction, the direction that the pyramid builders have insisted we should look at, we will see the constellation of Orion striking the meridian. We have exactly a lock happening, and only happening in 10,500 BC. This is what you have. The constellation striking its low point in 10,500 BC at the meridian, mimicking the pattern that you have on the ground with the Sphinx looking due east and with his representation in the sky. We have gone through the geological argument suggesting that the Sphinx is much older and possibly related to the end of the last ice age, matching the date of 10,500 BC. We now have two sciences suggesting this. But let's look closer. We need to be absolutely sure that this is not a coincidence. Not that I believe that it is. So far we've had more compilation of coincidence that sooner or later we have to stop saying it's coincidence. But let's make sure, because we're dealing with something that is so utterly important that we cannot be uncertain about it. And this is it. There is a major causeway. The Egyptologists call this contraption that you see on the ground a causeway, linking the central pyramid to a temple near the Sphinx. We're not even sure if it is a temple, passing along the boundaries of the pit in which the Sphinx rests. They call it a causeway because they believe that it served as a causeway. They believe that the body of the king on a sledge was dragged up this causeway. Now this causeway is made of blocks of 100 tons apiece. It's gigantic. And they tell us that what they think this causeway served was to drag the body of a dead king only once, for 5 minutes or 20 minutes, to place him inside this pyramid. And of course, that we haven't found the body doesn't bother them at all. Frankly, this is like saying that we build the M6 motorway for only to use it once, for somebody to skate down, use a skateboard only once on it. It's totally ridiculous. 100-ton blocks to build a causeway for that kind of use. What they have not noticed, because they do not think in this way, is that this causeway has a very important astronomical alignment. It is directed 14 degrees to the right of due east, to the south of due east. They went to a lot of trouble to link and to push our attention now to a direction 14 degrees passing next to the Sphinx. Let's follow the clues. Here you are, the sun rising at 14 degrees to the left or to the right, to the south of due east. Now you remember that the amplitude between the summer solstice and the spring equinox is 28 degrees as seen from Giza. It does not take a genius to work out that 14 degrees is half the angle. And it is a very important angle to the ancients. We call it today the cross quarter, because it happens. The sun rises at exactly that point 1 month before the spring equinox. What they're telling us is that something is happening and is becoming active 1 month before the spring equinox. Follow it and see what happens. Follow it to the spring equinox and see what happens. That is what they're telling us. So let's do that. The Sphinx, a rather faint picture, I'm afraid, but we didn't have a better one at this stage. Here is his rump, his pose, his head, and he's looking due east. And here is the causeway, pointing 14 degrees to the rising sun 1 month before the spring equinox. let's go to 10,500 BC. We are in 10,500 BC, and let's look, and let's see what they want us to see. Now, is it possible that what they want us to see is something to do with this? Horus in the horizon, a Horus figure, a leonine figure, sitting inside the horizon. He is cut within the bedrock of Giza, and probably the terminology means he is inside the horizon. Let's see if that is what they want us to look at. Well, it is, because when we bring the sunrise at 14 degrees on the day that they tell us to do so, along the causeway, we see that the constellation of Leo is half risen, with only its shoulder and head sticking out of the horizon, the real horizon. And when you transpose this on the ground, this is what you have. Horus in the horizon, matching his counterpart in the horizon, as they tell us, as they invite us to find. Horus in the horizon, the Sphinx, looking at the Nile, facing the Nile east. In fact, I've transposed a picture of the Sphinx in the sky, looking at the Milky Way. I don't need to use the terrestrial map. I have it in the sky. And they're asking us to consider this point, where the sun is exactly on the day of the spring equinox below the constellation of Leo in 10,500 BC, and only in 10,500 BC. They're drawing our attention to this place, the Genesis place. Do we have a rendezvous in the sky in this place? Is that what they're trying to tell us? Well, let's remember the dualistic language. No. What they're trying to tell us, here is the constellation. Here is the Sphinx. We're looking at a point, at a place they consider to be the Genesis time, 10,500 BC, below the rump of the celestial line. We transpose this on the ground, and this is what we have. A point, a possible chamber, a Genesis chamber. Let's see if I can focus this. There we are. Below the rump of the Sphinx. Now, so far, we have followed the clues step by step, and we have reasoned out, we have spoken these astroglyphs, we have received the message, and we're beginning to see that they are drawing our attention to this place on the ground. If the clues are right, this is what they're telling us to do. But is there evidence that something is there? Well, there is. Graham may have pointed this out, but when John Anthony West did his geological work in 1991 to 93, they used seismographic equipment and identified a chamber, a rectangular cavity, a chamber underneath the front pose of the Sphinx. We are suggesting that there is a link, and that here we will find the so-called Genesis chamber, perhaps the Hall of Records. Do we have a rendezvous there? Does mankind have a rendezvous with Genesis there? Well, as I'm speaking, in November 1995, somebody entered a tunnel under the Sphinx. A tunnel at the rump of the Sphinx, leading to precisely the place where we have indicated. Who has entered the tunnel? Who is this shadowy figure that we see here? I will end my talk here, and I will hand the floor to Graham Hancock, because we have an important announcement to make concerning this matter, and concerning also what's happening inside the Great Pyramid. Thank you very much.